Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 39 of the Gaming Pubcast. And I am joined by Tom and our special guest, Mr. Lewis Packwood, journalist and writer of Curious Video Game Machines.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show.
Pleased to have you here.
Yes. So, Curious Video Game Machines. I tell you what, give us a quick synopsis so people know what we're talking about. How would you advertise it to us if I hadn't read it?
Okay, well, I suppose I should introduce myself as well. I've been a gaming journalist for about 10 years, and I write for Edge and Eurogamer and Retro Gamer and all sorts of publications, and The Guardian as well. And I came up with this book a few years ago. It's taken quite a long time to write, but I wanted to kind of tackle some of the odder machines out there that people don't seem to know about, or if they have heard of them, they don't know much about them. So I wanted to kind of shine a light on gaming's alternative history, really, away from the kind of Ataris and Segas and Nintendos. You know, what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I say to you, I was a bit cocky with the thing. When I saw the title, I thought, I bet I've heard these. And I think out of many, because it's not just the chapter titles, there's many machines. I probably heard of maybe, if you exclude all the Segas and Nintendos, out of the 13 chapters, maybe 2 of them. And those were slight. Only one of them I'd actually desired, but maybe two of them I'd heard of. But yes, they are very curious. Very curious.
They are.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we obviously don't want to give away too much that's in the book. We will chat a lot about sort of general things. So, what's your favourite? What's the one that you most liked writing about or researching?
I think my probably favourite one I wrote about was the Galaxia, which was a Yugoslavian computer made by this guy called Voja Antonic, who is just such an amazing story that you couldn't get computers in the early 80s in Yugoslavia. They're this very punitive kind of import ban. Essentially, anything that cost more than about 50 Deutschmarks, you couldn't import. So that meant computers like the Spectrum or Commodore 64, there was no way to kind of get hold of them unless you had special permission to import these goods.
Yeah.
So this guy Voja, he came up with an idea of making a very cheap computer with a kind of unique selling point where it didn't have a graphics chip. It used the CPU and kind of used half of it for graphics and half of it for computing. So he had this clever idea so that you could kind of get these very cheap kind of Z80 CPUs and import them and then make your own machine. And he published the instructions in this magazine, and it was huge. It sold 100,000 copies, this magazine, and thousands of people made their own Galaxias, and it kind of really kick-started a computer revolution.
I think I remember
in Yugoslavia.
that. Wasn't there part of it or somebody used a suntan lamp as part of it, or somebody added to it?
That's right.
So,
yeah.
It's unique.
Yeah. So it was part of his kind of history was using EEPROMs. So these are erasable, programmable read-only memory chips. So the idea of these read-only memory, normally you can only read it, clues in the name. But EEPROMs, they had this little window in them, and if you shone a really strong ultraviolet light through that window, then it would erase all of the contents of the chip, and you could program it again.
Okay.
So by kind of, it was a tool that you could make your own little machines.
Yes.
But of course, it was quite a difficult thing. If you made one error whilst you were coding it, you have to basically erase it and start all over again.
Oh God. Yeah, that sounds.
There was no cloud backup in the 70s, in the 80s.
Funny enough, reading the book, there was a number of the systems that, being a retro myself and having quite a large collection of stuff, there were some things that I actually owned, like the Barcode Battler, and
yeah,
that's the one I wanted.
Oh, you're welcome to it. And the hologram games, the arcade games. There was one in my local seaside town, and I think you paid something like £5 a go or something crazy back in the day. And like like the Laserdisc games, the controls, if it wasn't precise, you would lose, you would die. And but looking at the technology behind that, it's fascinating how they managed to achieve something so futuristic and unique. And I always wanted to own it. In fact, I went to the arcade and said to the guy, "If you ever let go of this, can I buy it off you?" He was like, "No way, no way." So I think he's still got it.
They're worth a lot now, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah, with the Barcode Battler, I think you say in the book that it didn't sell very well in the UK and the US because anybody who had £30, I think it's retailed for, paid £40 and got a Game Boy instead. And that was me. That was me back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, that was it. I think it was about either £10 or £20 difference, I think, between the two, and it was like a no-brainer. Why would you get one of these when you could get a Game Boy?
I think the great thing,
but I mean,
you could go to the supermarket and scan barcodes all over the place and get the points or the whatever it was. And I think I've used it once. So still sitting in the box and full of cards and things. And fascinating machine.
So I mean, there's even the history of the barcodes in your book, isn't there? Which I didn't know about that.
That's right. Yeah. I was kind of intrigued to include the Barcode Battler because obviously I never owned one back in the day, but I remember when they came out, I'm thinking it was such a strange idea, and it was a massive flop over here, and I was kind of intrigued to find out more about it, and I couldn't believe all of the stuff that I found out about Barcode Battler. It's got such an interesting history, and there's such an interesting afterlife as well. It carried on and evolved into all sorts of other things, but it was huge in Japan, like to the point where it was prefigured kind of Pokemon. It was like that kind of level of success where there was even a train line that had a special promotion where if you visited every stop, you could get a Barcode Battler card, and if you collected them all, you'd have this whole set of this special train line set. And there were all sorts of promotional ones. There was tie-ins with Mario Kart. There was tie-ins with Super Mario World, and there were some Zelda cards. There was all sorts of this. So it was absolutely huge. And I think it just fit more with the culture over there because it was all tied around these things called the Conveni Wars. So it was all to do with convenience stores, which are huge in Japan. There's one every few meters practically. And it's very much a kind of way of life that you go in there. So people would, and all of the things in the game are all themed after items you find in a convenience store. But we lost that when it kind of came over. It didn't really have the same
there's people
impact.
reverse sort of almost reverse engineering it now, aren't they, and trying to find out how the scanning works and all sorts. Because I even when I read the book, you put about some apps that are available, and unfortunately, I think most of them have died a death as well. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to relive my barcode battling. What I wanted to do back in the 80s and 90s.
End up getting potential robbery, having walking around the store trying to grab barcodes and ram them in the Barcode Battler. But
I just have this image of the train station being in, next stop Doncaster. Oh yes, I've got a card. Wouldn't quite work as well in this country, I don't think. People just do that.
Yeah, I think the whole thing kind of like died very quickly in the sense that, like you say, people worked out which were the best barcodes, and then they released barcode printers. I think Bandai released a barcode printer. So once people had worked out the formula, you could just type in the actual best barcode and then print it out as many times as you wanted. And it kind of took all the fun out of it, really.
So what was your first machine that you ever owned?
First one I ever owned, I think, was a Game Boy. I had played on my dad's Spectrum before that. But the first one I owned myself was a Game Boy, and then quickly followed by an NES and a Super NES in the years to come.
Similar thing. I was sort of given the Spectrum because my parents were very anti-gaming, but they worked out pretty quickly. It wasn't really a productive educational thing, although I did some programming. But I was very lucky to have, well, I suppose lucky, but the late 70s, early 80s Pong influx. We had, I don't know if you've heard of it, a machine called the Interstate. And it was a
Interstate.
It's one for the next book.
Yeah, it's a Pong. It was there's like you say, the book, there was a flood of them in the late 70s, early 80s. I think it was created in 1978, but it had a light gun. Wow, it was.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
it was technologically advanced. So when Duck Hunt came out and friends who had NESs, I was sitting there going, I've been playing that for 3 years, although I would have been about 6 when the NES came out. So I didn't have many friends, but yes. So Interstate it's called, and it had.
Well, I imagine it was one of the General Instruments Pong clones. So General Instruments made this Pong chip in the 1976, I think, and it featured about 4 Pong variants, and then it had 2 light gun games on it, and it was produced millions of times, and so many different machines featured exactly the same chip inside, but from different manufacturers and different outsides. But essentially, it was all the same chip, just
It just
reproduced
had
again and again.
It had a knob in the middle, and I think I can't remember how many games. I think it said it was 10 games, but it wasn't 10 games. It was
10 variations.
It was 10 variations of Pong, and the light gun.
Yeah.
Even as a 6-year-old, I'd just walk right up to the screen and click, 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 and just have a million point. Well, not a million points, but a lot of points straight away. But I was very interested to read and find out, and then there was the bit that said there was loads of Pong clones. Oh, okay, so that's so. And I found out. I think my dad's one. He still has it, and I think you can get it on eBay for about £25 now. So it's not particularly rare or expensive.
No, they're not that collectible, although they are really interesting. I mean, I've just written a book chapter a few months ago for another upcoming book. Not as part of from a different publisher. I've just contributed a chapter, and I contributed a chapter on Pong clones or Pong consoles, and it's fascinating, really. Like they've got their own little history, and there were, as I said in this book, there's hundreds of them, about 900 at least.
They were almost an industry in themselves, wasn't they, at that stage?
They were, and they appeared all over the world. But I think one of the interesting things is we don't really know exactly what the first one was. No one's quite sure. There is one that I think came out in 1974, which predates Atari's one, which came out in 1975. And there's so little information on it, and they're so rare. I mean, those ones, like, they would be really interesting to kind of find out more about those, because hardly anyone knows anything about them. There's one that I think one of the earliest we think was made by a shop in London on, was it Tottenham Court Road? No, I don't think it was Tottenham Court Road. It was some road in London, just some electronics shop that appeared to have made their own.
Wasn't it the Game Board? They made something called the Game Board, and it had it was just literally a circuit with the controllers, and even the controllers were so basic that if you turned it too hard, the function would tear off. I'm sure I've seen an article about this thing, and then someone built like a wooden surround to go with it to fit the board in. But I'm sure it was actually called something like the Game Board or something like that.
I mean, things like this are fascinating because it's still not clear exactly. There's not been enough research into this, and it's still very vague. All we know is that it was like Magnavox Odyssey in 1972, and then seemingly nothing happened until Atari came out with Pong in 1975. But there was stuff.
Yeah.
It's just not very well
in the book.
You
talk about the politics, because there were so many legal, people suing each other, companies, copying patents and all sorts of things in the 70s and 80s. Obviously, before the US video game crash. It was quite a minefield as well. So, and I think if I remember rightly, it says there was Pong was copyrighted, but then there was a problem with the copyright. They were sued, or somebody was sued, and then all the clothes just came out from everywhere, didn't they?
I mean, that was an interesting saga. So Magnavox essentially sued everyone in sight after when they had this patent that was made by Ralph Baer, who created the Odyssey, and then as part of the Magnavox Odyssey deal, Baer's patents were sold to Magnavox, I believe, as part of that deal, and then Magnavox aggressively pursued everyone kind of making game consoles and things, and had a very the very broad patent, which essentially kind of applied specifically to kind of Pong, but almost you could argue that could apply to all video games. And I don't know, I haven't been able to verify these figures, but I mean, it seems like Magnavox made far more from suing other companies over these patents than they ever did from making Odyssey consoles. But I can't verify that. I've tried to verify the figures, and I can't get exact figures. But certainly Ralph Baer in his book says it was something in the order of like 100 million that Magnavox kind of made in terms of
Someone's
pursuing
sitting
patents
very happy nowadays
related to
on
the
that,
Odyssey.
so,
So yeah, I mean, I've read the book, and you touch on every. I mean, it's very technical, but at the same time, you talk about the stories behind. So about the people, about the legal problems, the politics. The one quite bitter battle was the founder. I didn't realize the founder of Commodore bought out Atari, and hence
So confusing, isn't
the
it?
Commodore, the ST, and the Amiga were that was really bitter because Atari bailed out Amiga, and then Commodore came along and bought out the entire company. And
That's right.
And it's almost like a sort of 1980s dynasty style drama, and there's lots of those.
I mean,
in the book.
it really is.
That was particularly the most bitter one that stood out.
It really is. It really is. It's such a confusing saga and fascinating. I kind of I'm surprised no one's made a drama about it because it's just brilliant.
I immediately thought about
Jack Tramiel, who's kind of
things like Silicon Valley, and which obviously is fictional, but then BlackBerry and other such things that have been so popular recently in movies and TV and whatnot. And so it immediately I thought this is something that Netflix or somebody needs to buy up.
I'm sure someone will pick up on it at some stage.
Oh, it will be. It's really bitter. I mean, so I made so many notes and everything, but I'll tell you now, I think it was chapter 12 I had to gloss over. Nothing bad about it. The reason why is because I don't know if you're like me. Your book, every single last detail, I'm sort of like, I wonder if that chip that he's mentioned is available on eBay. What does it look like? So I go down rabbit holes. As soon as you start mentioning something, I go down a rabbit hole. Then 4 hours later, I'm like, I should go back to the book now and carry on reading because I've been looking up at what things look like, who that person is, what that person. And although you have a massive amount of information, it did delay me reading the actual book because it was so interesting to somebody who is a geek like me. So
I love a tangent as well. I'm just like you. I mean, half of the book is tangents where I'm just like, well, this is interesting. I'm just going to tell you about the history of LEDs now. Here we go. I just find.
Do you find yourself hard to concentrate
we'll talk about this bit
on the subject?
Yeah, I think I find sometimes the tangents more interesting.
Yeah,
like just pursuing a little kind of little cul-de-sac because as I'm writing this book and I'm finding out all sorts of stuff. During my research. And even when I'm writing a chapter, I'll just double check this detail, and then that opens up a whole new area that I didn't know. And this is far from a definitive history. I should point that out. This isn't. Ideally, I kind of want to shine a light on some of these kind of forgotten corners of video game history for others to then go into in more detail. And I know, for example, a few people who are working on whole books about just some of the systems in here, or kind of other obscure game systems. So
one of my favorite systems is the Philips CDI, which I know a lot of people hate, but I love it. And it'll bring me on to another topic that's in your book as well. But the back story behind, forgetting the Nintendo saga, the Nintendo Super CD, but the CDI, the technology and the groundwork that led to that system is fascinating. And I think even some of those systems that were relatively successful in some countries,
bloody expensive,
need a more in-depth story. need to go into it. But one of the systems in your book that really interested me, and I owned it for a period of time, was the Action Max VHS console.
Oh yes, the Action Max.
Yeah, they were like £20 by the end of their life, where you could pick them up with 3 games, I think, boxed together. But I mean, it was a VHS tape that relied on the light sensor. And correct me if I'm wrong, it relied on the light sensor for you to be able to shoot what was on the screen, rather than anything changing on the actual cassette itself.
Yes. So I think the only thing that changed was there was a red LED counter on the console itself that kind of went up if you managed to score a successful hit, but otherwise the video played out exactly the same whatever happened. Which you can see it's only going to have limited lifespan. By the time you've played that cassette 3 or 4 times, the novelty
or the tape might have worn out, one or the other.
Or the tape might have worn out.
There was a lot of these, especially the later ones in the book. There was a lot of tat, but there was a lot that were absolutely groundbreaking. I mean, whether you go back all the way back to, I want to get the name right, Kim Tank Tix, or that's whether right, you go to the hologram one, which although and then you had virtuality and whatnot. They were groundbreaking, and some of that technology, although it's been improved, opened up the eyes, and these people went on to work at whether it was Intel or Sony, or a lot of these technologies were the prequels to further ones. And yes, Sega came in to buy things, and Commodore came in, and Atari bought things, but but looking at them, a lot of them, I mean, especially things like the pink one, Master Gear Girl.
The Master System Girl, yeah.
Master System Girl, that was it. Master System Girl. I mean, it was the same technology, but it's just pink.
Virtuality was a fantastic VR headset, though, back in the day. I mean, I love that system.
Have you played a one?
I have, yeah. In fact, I remember going to Shopadero in London and paying £10 a go to walk around. £10 back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, it was practically a whole month's wage.
I did see one of those once. A bit exotic in Vegas, in the basement of Bally's Hotel, because Bally's was so big, it had a theme park in the basement, and they had at least 2 or 3 of them connected. I don't know how many they could connect, but I think it was about $15-20, and this was 1990 whatever. And it was my brother was getting married over he lives in the States, and so I was with my parents, and they went, nah, not a chance.
Well, you spent more time waiting for them to reload the computers because they were overheating than actually playing them. And then
the early ones were certainly notoriously unreliable.
They were,
but the tracking was very good. I mean, they used magnetic. Even now, I know some collectors who kind of played them, and they say the fidelity is brilliant in terms of actual tracking your head. But the trouble was that system was incredibly expensive.
20 frames per second,
and it cost and it went about 20 frames per second, and it was the actual system for tracking. I think it's something like initially it would cost for each unit. It cost something like $10,000, and they got it down a bit lower than that.
So you do go into the story of the development of virtuality and how they got the production cost down, but then why eventually, spoiler, virtuality went belly up.
Atari,
not for having a rubbish system.
Well, Atari adopted some of the technology in their proposed VR headset, which is very rare. But I will say I did actually own one. I had a developer unit for the Jaguar VR, and it worked as well. It had, I think it was Missile Command, or was it Asteroids? I can't remember. Anyway, it did work, and I sold it on. So I was very skint, and I sold it. Made a lot of money off it. But
hang on, was that the VR or was that the screen one?
It was considered a VR headset for the Jaguar. Was it for VR? Absolutely not. No, and it was nowhere near as good as the Virtual Boy. I can't believe I'm saying that. But it did have great head tracking. So with the screens, you could, it was great, and it didn't overheat or anything like that. But with the screens, the screens were so small that how it was displayed, you could see almost outside of the viewing display. But yeah, I was very lucky to hold on to that for about 3 months before I decided that actually this was a very expensive and bad investment and time to move on. So
probably not a bad investment, just a expensive investment.
Had I kept it, maybe. But yeah, the one that intrigues me though is the Turtles Challenge game.
Oh yes,
for the VHS video games. I've yet to find one online that I can find screenshots of, but
it's very rare. It was only released in Europe, and it's also abysmal. It's by far the worst game released for no, it wasn't Video Challenger, wasn't it?
That's
I think
right.
it came out. Not Action Max.
Video Challenger.
Yeah, the Video Challenger. Yes, it's absolutely awful apparently. But so you're probably not worth digging it. But because it's rare,
Actually,
obviously.
Getting onto the games side of it is, I mean, you say about a few, but I remember one that there's a chapter on the Enterprise computer, and you describe it as gorgeous, and I agree with you. It's quite colourful. It's a very good looking machine. But are you more interested in the technology or the aesthetics or the game and software kind of side? Which is your?
I will put my hand up and say I'm purely an aesthetics man.
Not a problem. It is a gorgeous machine, Enterprise.
I think, to be fair, though, it did have fairly solid tech specs, at least when it was announced in like 1983. It seems well ahead of its time. But yes, I think aesthetically it's a real looker, and interesting that the Amstrad CPC had a very, very similar design, I will say, when it was kind of unveiled after the prototype of the Enterprise had been shown. I did actually send a text to Lord Alan Sugar and ask him, was this a coincidence? He didn't get back to me.
He never does,
so maybe we'll never know. We'll never know what happened with that. But who knows?
Tom will be happy with that, because out of the retro computers, I'm a Spectrum guy. He's an Amstrad guy.
I win, of course. I win. What are your thoughts on the HAL? Because obviously that was real future tech, or supposedly.
Oh yes, so this is the Halcyon, made by Rick Dyer's company. Rick Dyer, who did Dragon's Lair. Yeah, I mean that was an interesting thing, wasn't it? I mean, I can't see how in any world that could have been successful, considering how expensive the technology was. I think the retail price would have been, I think, something like $2,500, which is just incredible. I mean, I don't know. You probably would only be able to sell a handful of these. A Laserdisc powered console that needed, also every game needed a Laserdisc and a cartridge. And then you had to have this kind of headset and a keyboard and a voice activated system.
It was terrible, wasn't it? Apparently,
I think it could only recognize something like 150 words or something, or 200 words, something like that. I mean, when you think now, like Siri or whatever, has thousands upon thousands of words in its vocabulary. There's a brilliant clip if you look for it, and I think I reference it in the book, where Rick Dyer is demonstrating the console to Stuart Sheffey on the Beats Chronicles.
It can't recognise the number one.
And it can't recognise the number one. And Stuart's kind of going 1, and the console's going, huh? And he's going 1, and the console's going, speak more clearly, Stuart. And he's going 1. So yeah,
I think it would have been a very interesting place had that came about. I mean, Laserdiscs are a massive favourite of mine, and some of the Laserdisc games were brilliant. Rubbish to play, but brilliant. in themselves. But yeah, just imagine what the future will look like now had that driven forward and had the success. I mean, you only have to look at things like the CDTV and the Panasonic 3DO, and the prices then were, you know, £600 to £1,200 for the full set for the CDTV, £699 for the 3DO. And when you look at the prices in comparison now, we're talking more than the PlayStation 5 in cost.
Oh wow, loads
So,
more. Yeah, I mean, what $699 be equivalent? That'd be over
yeah,
$1,000
it's
now.
crazy to think.
You're
But
probably looking
I
at.
suppose in comparison, if you look at everything that Sega put into the end of the Mega Drive's lifespan with the 32X and the 15 other add-ons they released over time, it probably was comparable. So, you know, what technology,
Yeah, yeah.
if you could have seen something and had it been a success, what technology out of all the things in the book would you have liked to have seen lead future technology? What would have been the one?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, I'd be intrigued by holograms. I mean, if we could actually get holograms to work, that would be
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, I talk about holograms in the book, and I think all of the hologram games we've had so far, it's all smoke and mirrors. Literally, it's mirrors. You know, it doesn't really create any protection. But I do miss the kind of Pepper's Ghost effect you get on
Yeah.
arcade machines. You know, it was used so well and so cleverly on some of these old arcade machines that it doesn't really get used at all anymore now. You know, the idea of projecting another image onto the kind of angled glass so you get that effect. I'd love to see that come back or be evolved in some sort of way because it can be used incredibly cleverly. And I think they do use it in some kind of theme park rides. I think they used it on the Harry Potter ride at Universal
That's right.
Studios.
Yeah.
So you know, it
I
does
think it
give
was
you.
used in Lord of the Rings as well in the Two Towers for the fire effect. So
There we
when
go.
they're
Yeah.
burning the guy on the in the White Tower, it's actually a projected image of the fire to not scare the horse. So it's used in other areas as well. But
There we
and
go.
obviously Atari were going to release the hologram handheld at one stage.
Yes, the Cosmos. Is
The
it the
Cosmos, yeah.
Cosmos?
I think
Yeah.
it was demoed
There's
once, wasn't it? At
only.
one a gaming expo.
That's right. It was the plug got pulled in it right at the last minute. I think they were at the point where they'd even kind of manufactured all the boxes and things, and it was essentially all ready to go. And then management decided to pull the plug, and it never got released. So we only have a handful of them in existence, and they go for quite a lot of money now. But to be honest, they're not that good. I mean, they're played very simple kind of LCD games, but with
And
a
an
hologram
overlay or
behind them.
something, wasn't it?
But the clever thing is, it's a
Yeah.
two-part hologram. So by shining one light, it shows one image, and shining another light, it shows another one. So you essentially have that ability to have
Like a sort of parallax,
two
but
backgrounds and switch it
in
between.
physical physical parallax.
Yeah, although only one is shown at a time though, so it's kind of like it's kind of shown the image of say I think there's a basketball game where it could switch from an overhead court view to a view on the basket. I think I'm not 100% sure about that, but
It's fascinating.
uh,
It's fascinating. No wonder they went bust. It went wrong.
I've just written a big feature about Atari for Edge magazine actually that's in the new issue. So it's fascinating to dig into the history of that company. It's had a wild ride
And they
since
keep trying
since
to come
70s.
back. And I know it's not the same people, but I like the VC. Was it what was the most? Is it the VCS?
The 2600 plus, was it?
That's the recent one. But what was the one that had the
VCS
digital
Plus,
downloads and it was like an Android with a front end.
Oh.
Yes, I think it was just called the Atari
that was
VCS
quite
confusingly.
an attractive unit. I like that one, but there's no confidence in it sticking around, so I never bought one.
No, well, I think they were only available in the US as well, but I found that machine it seemed to be, I don't really sure who it was for. It was kind of a low-end PC essentially that did TV streaming and had a handful of old classic games on it, but it cost like $400.
Me and Tom had this debate when the 2600 plus came out, and I was like, "What? Who's it for?" Because if you're a collector of the games, you're going to want the original hardware. if you want to play the games, then you're probably going to emulate them. You don't want to be paying. You're probably not going to collect the games.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I spoke to the Atari CEO about this a couple of months ago, and he said they've been surprised how many people have bought it. People who aren't necessarily collectors, but maybe they played it when in their youth, and they've got a bundle of old cartridges in their attic, but they can't use their old 2600 because how do you connect like a 1970s console to a modern TV? So just the idea of having a console that you could just plug in via HDMI
and still
I think
use
we
your
need an
original.
Atari Jaguar
And it's-
Mini. I'm looking forward to that one.
I did ask him about that actually. He wouldn't tell me
It's
about their
coming.
plans, unfortunately. Although I suspect it will
Yeah,
be
I
on the
think
way.
it'll
We'll
come
see.
eventually.
No news is good news.
That's it.
Definitely.
Yeah. But absolutely fantastic book. I mean,
So-
I've got a lot of gaming books, but this is one of those ones where you're sort of glued to the detail. Is the only way to put it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's been plenty of books about the history of gaming, but I think there's lots of areas that are just glossed over, and I really wanted to kind of like investigate some of the things, like the Halcyon. I know Tristan Donovan wrote a brilliant book called Replay: The History of Video Games, which is wonderful, absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful book. I'd highly recommend. And I think the Halcyon gets like one paragraph in the whole book, and I'm like, and that was where I first found out about it, and I was like, what? Well, I want to know more about this weird console that was made by the guy who did Dragon's Lair and was based on Laserdisc. And there's hardly anything out there, so I was like, well, I'm gonna have to find out myself.
It's a good time to document them for these people. Like, I mean, a lot of them are no longer around, so trying to find that detail is increasingly harder every time. So,
well, you also told me that there is a Don Bluth Dragon's Lair movie being made with Ryan Reynolds, who I'm just like, I'm a Ryan Reynolds fanboy.
Yes.
And yes, that.
Yes, well, we'll see. I mean, I don't know.
IMDb says it's in production.
I don't know.
They've been saying that about He-Man for about 15 years. So
could be it. But Ryan Reynolds does get things done. He is.
We'll see. We'll see.
So fingers crossed, because I am, as I said, a bit of a Ryan Reynolds fanboy. But do you actually do you own any of the devices from the book? Do you?
No, I've got to say I'm not really a collector. I hardly collect anything with games, but what I'm interested in is stories. I love collecting kind of stories and finding out all this stuff. So that's my interest. Just going and speaking to people, delving into corners, asking questions. That's what I'm interested in mostly. I mean, I do love games and I play games a lot. I'm just not really a collector.
So who's the most interesting person that you've interviewed or that you've become friends with or just met? Is there anybody that's made you speechless? They are sort of like, oh my god, I've met this person.
I probably the only one who's made me kind of speechless. Well, I wouldn't say I wasn't speechless, but the only one that's kind of made me kind of come away from the call thinking, oh my god, I can't believe that happened, was talking with Nolan Bushnell a little while back, and I was like, wow, that was kind of that was the only time I've ever had like a kind of real stars in your eyes moment. It's like, oh my god, you're the guy who started all this.
Mine's coming up in a few weeks. We're interviewing Gary Bracey from Ocean Software, and I must admit, I'm a little bit like,
yes, Tom's leading that one because well, if he can get his words out.
Lewis, I have one request from you, as you're the man for detail.
Yes.
Can you please do a book on unreleased machines?
Oh yeah,
that would be.
Yeah, that would be.
Oh well, that's it. You've started on a rabbit hole now. He's going to be up until 6 o'clock in the morning. Hang on, I'll just see what there is.
The stuff that could be in that book would be fascinating, and trying to get the detail would be amazing. So
yeah, I would absolutely be up for doing that. I feel there's definitely I've only kind of covered one unreleased machine in this book, which is the Halcyon. Although a few did come out, but yeah, I'd love to do something like that. It would be quite difficult, I think, in terms of finding images and speaking to people involved with them. But I would love that challenge. There is one more machine. I'm hoping to do a follow-up to Curious Video Game Machines.
I can imagine there's a lot.
a volume
more.
2. It kind of depends on how well this one sells. If people buy this one, enough people buy this one, then I'll do another one. But it's certainly things like the Connex multi-system I'd love to kind of cover for that. Because
I don't know that one. The Connex.
Get Googling.
Yep. I'm on it. I'm on it. I'm on it. Yep.
I think there are so many rare ones. Like you got the Panasonic. The 3DO M2, obviously the follow-up to the 3DO, which I think the technology ended up in vending machines, if I remember rightly.
it did get used. I think it's owned by, is it Gold Star? I think possibly some Korean firm bought it. Was it Samsung? I can't remember.
And then you have.
I think the tech did end up being used in computers.
Same with the Atari Jaguar. Actually, I think the follow-up was meant to be going to be the Panther, which was originally going to be the name for the Jaguar, and that.
Yeah, that was before the Panther. That was going to be a 32-bit console. I know, and then they decided to ditch that and just go one step ahead and do the Jaguar. But I spoke to Chris Kohler recently, who worked at Digital Eclipse. They just released the Jeff Minter. Lamas of the Jeff Minter story, and he was telling me about, that features a lot of stuff about the Connex multi-system and the Panther as well. Jeff Minter worked on the Panther and was creating, I think, Attack of the Mutant Camels for the Panther, and then ended up writing it for the
really sort of fever dream game, isn't it? The Mutant Camels.
Yes, that's right. But then he ended up doing Tempest 2000 for the Jaguar.
You've said you love the stories and everything. I'd go sort of advertisement for the book. It's on the website, which if people listen, curiousvideogamemachines.com. You actually, I don't know whether you created it or somebody else created it. You did like a little point and click game. That was. I thought I saw the video on somebody else where you were doing the presentation. I thought, has he programmed something?
Yeah.
Has he done a PowerPoint? And I was Googling. I was all sorts of everything. And then literally in the description of the video, it said, if you want to play this, go to the website. So there, curiousvideogamemachines.com. And Tom, he's done a brilliant, it's very, very short, but it's a point and click game. And I absolutely loved it, and I loved the way you presented it to people. It was very good. Just thought I'd put that in there. That was absolute genius. I think for a gaming geeks, I guess.
It was pretty fun.
Did you make that?
It took me like about a day to write. Yeah, I just made it in about a day. It's essentially just a load of HTMLs, of URLs just all strung together. It's quite fun to do.
Very clever, very clever. And with Chris Crawford with a chainsaw, although that is in the book as well.
Oh yeah, Chris Crawford. Yeah, Chris Crawford. I mean, you mentioned who's been one of the most fun people to speak to, and Chris Crawford is definitely up there. What a character he is. He kind of founded GDC, and he kind of made a reputation as being an evangelist for Atari, and a tech evangelist. He was heavily involved with the Atari home computers, the 800 and so on. And he's a brilliant speaker, and he's just wonderful person to talk to. So he's got so many stories.
We might have to contact him now. Write that name down.
If we could get him.
He's in his I think he's in his 70s now, so he's long since retired. But he did release a game not that long ago, so he loves tech. He loves tinkering.
I think that's the key with the interviews that we're doing, is trying to get leaders in the industry, such as yourself, such as people that are doing things different and have innovated in the past and innovating now. And it's really interesting to get people's different points of view on gaming now as well as in the past. So the book is fantastic, guys, and for our listeners out there, we'll post the links in the description, and do pop onto Amazon or onto the website and check out the point and click game and purchase the book. I'm going to be waiting for you to release the unreleased consoles book, of course, so no pressure.
And if you do something about,
it does take a long. I tell you what, it does take a long time to write a
well,
book. I
you
will say
were
that. It takes
writing
a
about
long,
the
long time.
Galaxia console, the computer. I saw that was an article you did, I think 11 years ago, I want to say, on Eurogamer.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the first ones I did as a freelance game journalist.
Yeah, so
It was a
I saw that and thought, oh, so this has been definitely a book of passion.
Well, that was it. I mean, I wrote about I found out the story of the Galaxia like about 10 years ago, and hardly anyone knew it back then. And since then, that story's kind of gained a bit of traction. It's certainly in coding circles in the US, and more and more people have found out about it. But the kind of that set me on a path, I think, for looking for curious game machines. And it was when I spoke to Chris Crawford about 2 or 3 years ago, for a feature I was doing for Retro Gamer. And then he talked about Kim Tactics, and I was like, oh, what on earth is this? And then that was around the point where I thought, well, maybe, all these stories I've read about in the past, maybe I should kind of do them a bit more detail, go into more detail, write a book. And then during that process, I just found loads and loads more machines that I wanted to write about. In fact, I had to trim it down for this book. I think it's what, 18, 19 chapters. Originally, it was going to be a lot more, but I decided to actually just do a few machines, but go into real detail about them rather than do loads and just
It's
put
got to be
a
released
paragraph
at
or
some
something.
point, hasn't it?
Exactly.
Maybe it's time for you to put it into a documentary as well.
Well, I was
Oh,
just thinking if
I
if there's a Golden Globe appears because of the Netflix drama about Amiga and Atari and Commodore, then if you could just give us a little credit at the bottom, kind of thing. But no, it would. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of a push at the moment for game preservation, but what there isn't a push for, I don't think, and I think you and other writers, like you were saying before about specific devices, are the stories behind these things, and the stories. The stories are absolutely amazing. Quite a lot of them. They're full of really the big evil company and the the eccentric millionaires and the eccentric bedroom developers, and it's got it all. It's got the drama, it's got the comedy, it's got the tragedy, it's got the horror. I mean, I won't brush too much on it. And there was one guy who was that says, "At Her Majesty's pleasure." Right now, there is. I think there was some other person that you mentioned that was done for tax evasion, so went to prison. So it's the stories of gaming has everything. It's not just a big company, a boring machine with a load of tech details and everything. It is, it's interesting for everybody. It's not just geeks like me and Tom. But yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to focus too much on the kind of technical aspects in the book. I wanted to kind of focus more on the stories and behind them and the stories of the people behind them. Because I think that's what I find
And
most
now those stories
interesting.
live forever.
Right?
That's the key.
Stuff,
Yeah.
exactly. I often think I did a big feature on video game preservation a couple of years ago. I looked at the state of it, what's going on, and I think overall games are fairly well preserved, certainly better than silent movies, for example. The equivalent. Most silent movies are lost. Pre-1920 silent movies are gone. Whereas we've got most of the games still in some shape or form. But in terms of the stories, we're still finding out stuff that happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s. New stories are constantly coming out, and it feels like there's loads more that we need to find out. And we have to speak to the people who were involved in that before they pass on. I feel like there should be some sort of oral history of video gaming out there. I'd love there to be some way to kind of interview people and upload them and have an archive of that oral history of gaming that people can refer to in the future, because if we don't find out those stories now, then they'll be lost
Definitely.
forever.
And I think that's something that is really missing. And in a lot of ways, I find it fascinating. Someone was putting together a website 5-6 years ago where they'd interviewed people in nursing homes to tell their life story. And then they put the video of the interview on this website, and people would go in and listen to stories. And there would be a family passworded area where they could go in and listen to all these historic stories about. There was one guy that was a boxer and he was nearly 100, and he'd fought Jack Dempsey, and and he was talking about, and he was a New York taxi driver as well, and it's just all these stories fascinating. I think imagine doing the same thing with gaming and other areas, and it'd be fascinating. I think it's something that is sorely needed. Maybe the joys of YouTube may come in handy in this one. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about one of our topics for this evening. And one of those topics we were going to discuss was mixed reality. And do you own any, or have ever used any VR headsets?
Yes, definitely. I've owned it. Well, I've owned a couple. I've used a few down the years. I find it VR fascinating. There's some games that I've absolutely loved in VR. Star Wars Squadrons, for example. I played that non-stop, and I thought it was a fantastic game. And I was very sad when EA kind of abandoned it, seemingly very early on, because it was phenomenal to play in VR. So
I think I was listening to another podcast recently, and they were talking about mixed reality with the Vision Pro, which is, according to Apple, not a virtual reality headset. But one of the topics was how the new update allowed the virtual personas to actually play in the same room together, or watch movies in the same room, and you can see the physical bodies. But where do you think mixed reality is going in terms of gaming, or even just in everyday life? Do you think there's a future for it, or do you think it's going to just go the way of 3D movies?
I think it's an interesting question, and I think when I was speaking to some futurists and other people involved in the industry not that long ago for a feature looking ahead, their kind of point of view was that it could potentially be brilliant if the price could be brought down and the tech could be advanced enough. Ideally, you want this kind of thing where you could have a very tiny kind of like little headset, maybe even parts of glasses or something that you could put on, and at that point, and if it was cheap enough, then yes, we could see this being widely adopted.
Yeah.
The trouble is, to do that, you have to have massive amounts of investment, and then there's a catch-22 situation, because to do that, you need a viable market, and at the moment, the market is very, very niche. So unless someone comes along and kind of just invests billions and billions and billions to create a headset that's tiny and that everyone will want to use, that will then spark a mass market, I don't really see it ever being more than a very niche kind of area.
If only a big company like Google could make something out of, I don't know, glass.
Well, funny you say that.
Tom does actually own one. He will show me his
sitting next to me
glass next week.
is the old Google glass. So
that's it.
I'd say actually it was very good. I was quite impressed at the time, but it's very dated now. But I think it becomes a thing when you can put on a pair of glasses, and I wear reading glasses, and I think if you can walk down the street and you see an overlay over a store, or you can watch a movie trailer at a bus shelter and book tickets straight from the glasses, or say to the glasses, find me this product, and it will direct you to a store where that product's in stock, or allow you to order it if it's not. That's when it becomes a thing. And the technology gets out of the way.
It needs to be unobtrusive, and that's exactly the opposite of what these current systems are. I mean, I don't care that Apple have project your face on the outside of these things.
That's freaky, isn't it?
It's still just really weird, and most people looking at that going, "What the hell is this?"
It's just these ghost
Uncanny
eyes
Valley
on the spatial computer.
I know. The idea is cool, and I can see people who got an Apple Vision Pro. I'm sure they're absolutely loving it. And the kind of tech evangelists, the early adopters, they're going to absolutely love using these things. But for the vast majority of people, they're never going to spend $3,000 on one of these. And most people probably wouldn't want to because they don't want to have this thing on their face. But if it could be just a pair of glasses
it's
that you just tap or say
you can
speak
buy
to, then
glasses that take photos and will upload them to Snapchat or Facebook or stuff, and even those are a bit clunky around the lenses. And yeah, I don't want to have these big, thick things with heavy. I mean, me and you are both glasses wearers. I don't want, I don't want to have to take my glasses off to charge them or anything like that. It's there has. I don't think I know where the future is in terms of but yes, I would love something on my, as Tom described it, I would love something on my face that I could interact with whether it be an AI or just an assistant and I didn't have to touch it, and I could book things and I could search for things. I could read a book, let's say, Curious Video Game Machines, while I'm walking along and still see where I'm going.
I remember,
but I don't want it on my face.
I remember using Google Glass in London, and it had navigation, Google navigation, and you could use it while you were driving. But I remember coming out of an underground station and not knowing where I was going to meet my partner. So I said, "Okay, Glass, find me this place," and it did the navigation in my eye, and I could walk to this place. It was fantastic. Okay, I look like Georgie LaForge off of Star Trek Next Generation, but it worked. I was listening to music in my ear at the same time. And there were games, and I could watch YouTube videos and things like that. It worked really well, but it was £1,200. I didn't pay £1,200 for it, but it was a lot of money. You couldn't close them up like glasses. They were very hard to store. That's the bag you store them in. So
were they bone conduction?
They had bone conduction. You could plug in a single earphone or for calls, or you could plug in a stereo set up for music. And it was great when you were running. I used to run and use what's that running app called? Strava on it. And that was always good. And there was a zombie game where you could run and you would see a zombie chasing you. And it would tell you the distance between you and the zombie, and if it got you, the screen would turn red. So it did have its uses, but now it's useless and doesn't work anymore.
No.
Yeah. I got 15 years out of it, or whatever it is. So
I don't think it's that old, is it? Is it that old? No, it can't be that old.
2012.
That's a 12 years.
Yes.
Could be wrong. So where do you see gaming in general going in the future? Are we going to
Curious Machines? Do you see coming?
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to have a fully game streaming thing like Game Pass? Are we going to move to a portable thing like the Switch? Or are games just going to die and we'll end up going retro? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think retro is gaining traction. I think even among the younger generation, particularly people who like collecting physical things. They do. Kids who have grown up with all digital culture, they're actually quite interested in physical stuff. I think in terms of the mainstream, we're seeing more standardization of console architecture and just more, almost a bit like it was with VHS or something. You could buy a VHS player and they're from different manufacturers, but they do the same thing. It feels like we're kind of heading a bit towards that with games in a way. Like the consoles themselves don't really seem to have much difference between them. But I think what we might see, and what we're starting to see actually, is the PC technology becoming more adaptable. We're seeing things like the ROG Ally and other kind of like forms of the PC being made into a portable machine, being used in different ways. And because that's an open architecture, anyone could develop for it. You don't have to worry about, getting Sony or Microsoft to sign off your games or Nintendo. I think we might see a bit more of that, people kind of buying into the PC landscape in different ways. And at the same time, I think we're going to see much more boutique niche consoles, because that would be more possible. We've seen it with like the Playdate and a lot of these retro consoles that are just targeting specific market. Exactly.
It's fascinating that way.
I think we'll see more of
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Really liked it.
Well, I think we go back to the book, like you were saying, with the different people making for different. That's how it all really started. Was gaming started with somebody making something, and then shops. There was Sears, was it, who made the first consoles, and so now I think, yeah, like you said, there's going to be more PC based, so people can just create a console, whether it's ROG or Lenovo or Valve themselves, and I think that is where it's going. I think like you said, they're all the same architecture. And I'm a Steam Deck evangelist, so and my library's gone from about 600 games when I got it. I got almost a launch one, to I think I've just clocked 1,000 games. So all that's because of a completely open system that if I want to, I can pirate, and I've still bought 400 games. So in terms of the business people, it makes sense. In terms of the tinkerers, it makes sense because I can do what I want. And I think that is, like you said, it's more where it's heading. I think the systems without the 30%, but there is still the 30%.
Exactly. I mean,
if people want.
Yeah, and the idea of consoleized PCs, it's not a new idea. You know, the Steam machines from however long, 10 years ago, were kind of an early attempt to do that. I think it's much more viable now, and there's people who don't particularly want to tinker around with PCs and you know, do all that faff, but they do want to play the games. And if you want to play games, you know, like libraries like Steam and Epic, they've got thousands and thousands of games for very cheap, especially compared to something like the Switch. So yeah,
you can.
know, I reckon we'll see
you
more.
can pay £20 a year to play some NES games, or you can emulate them on a Steam Deck, or well, you could emulate them on most.
Oh well, you say that though. Emulation though, even for me, like I'm a games journalist, and I kind of sometimes have to do emulation for my job. I find it such a pain in the bottom.
I mean,
to see trying to emulate.
You do get trying to find a way of playing a game as it played on the original hardware. Yes, it is difficult, but you've got nowadays things like Emu Deck that works on all the handhelds, that does all the technical stuff for you, and I think that's mostly the problem. But then you do also have. I was reading or watching a thing about what's the Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy, and the fact that game had so many bugs that you couldn't complete it if you did certain things. And emulation means that people have released versions of games which work better in some cases. So it's a hit and miss. But then again, I have also played Mario 16.
Yes.
So that's, you know,
I think emulation is great. It's fantastic these games have been preserved, you know, for people to play, because there's no official libraries where games get kind of donated. It's like it's up to essentially pirates to kind of keep these games going, because often the companies themselves don't have copies of the original games. But at the same time, like actually accessing those games for just the layperson, you know, not someone who's proficient,
it's a minefield.
Proficient. Really difficult. It's really difficult. Even just trying to get some games to work on a, you know, you've got the emulator and you've got the ROM code, and just try to actually get it to work on a specific emulator can be an infuriating process. So if there was
nothing way, better than plugging in a cartridge or plugging in a machine.
Well, exactly. You know. But this is why I think, like, exactly, playing on the cartridge.
Just nothing.
This is why I think the Atari 2600 Plus has been so successful, because it's just a plug and play system. People want to play this.
We need an Amstrad Mini,
or new
I have to say.
Exactly.
Alan Sugar's brought back the brand, and his son's taking it over, so you never know. It's a possibility.
Who knows?
You never know. You never
Yeah.
know. I think the C64 has a mini, doesn't it? I think there
It's
is
got a mini and a maxi, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, blimey.
I think the Max had the buttons work on it as well, if I remember rightly.
That's all right. Yeah.
So yeah.
I
So
see.
it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. It's been a real pleasure and a guilty pleasure for Duncan, as you can probably tell.
It's been to speak to the person who made me go down those rabbit holes. It's been absolutely fantastic. We could probably sit here and chat to you for hours and hours, but it is 10:10 at night for those that want to know. And I'm sure people probably want to either go to bed or have their dinner if they're eating dinner late. But yeah, it's been fantastic.
So follow the links in the description. Buy the book.
CuriousVideoGameMachines.com or LewisPackwood.com. Are you still using that? Yep.
Yes, yeah, that's my portfolio site.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you can find. Yeah, buy the book.
It is.
It's really good.
It is an absolutely fantastic book, and whether you're a geek or you just want drama, it's fantastic. Fantastic.
That is for video games, definitely.
And so, yeah, see the link below.
Yeah.
And
Lewis, thank you so much. And guys, thank you for listening to today's show. Subscribe, follow,
and all that rubbish.
Do all the other things. And till the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
It's been a pleasure.